I think ultimately, accountability will lead to separation from the negative perspective. That is, when you're called to account for not meeting targets. Ultimately, that will be the end. But I want to assure the nation as a whole, teachers and principals and other agents in education in particular, that accountability does not have to mean separation, and that the ministry's first option is not separation, but rather to assist and to develop the agent's skills and capacity in meeting targets. So the ministry will be investing heavily in providing support, coaching, material, and indeed access to further professional development to ensure that our agents and the schools can meet the targets that are set. That's the first assurance that I would want to give about the accountability process. But having said that, I think we must now clearly develop and define the understanding of inefficiency in education. I don't think it has been tested in the courts as much, to the point where we would have had a kind of jurisprudence defined clearly as to what is inefficiency in education. But the accountability process will be moving us along that line. The other thing I want to say about the ministry's strategy for accountability is that accountability is not just sanction. Accountability also means that we must call in persons to find out why is it that they have surpassed the target. Because in the accountability framework, there is some learning taking place. We want to find out what is it that you have done that is better than what we have set as the target. So the ministry will be equally pursuing that angle as well, to learn from agents what they have done, so that we can get best practices and feed them back into our minimum standards, which then raises standards for everyone. Accountability also involves giving incentives and challenges. So if you have done better than the target, you should get a reward, and we should challenge you to do better. So the ministry will be emphasizing not just the negative side of accountability, but the positive side of accountability as well. Almost a year ago, I stood at this in this very room, effectively launching the ministry's thrust towards accountability. And at that presentation, I threw out the challenge to CaPRI and to PRIAL to look at accountability in Jamaica, to do some studies on our system to see how we could develop an accountability framework. One of the important things that we must always pay attention to in accountability is the provision of information to all the agents and stakeholders. It's important that everyone knows what is happening. In other words, for accountability to exist, all the agents must have a voice. And for them to have a voice, they must have information. And what CaPRI has done here today is to answer the challenge that I threw out, but more importantly, to provide a credible source of information to all the agents in the education sector, to enable voice, and that voice will ultimately raise alarms for areas of underperformance, give encouragement for areas where we have excelled, and ultimately become a call to action for better. And I'm hoping that the public will receive this study done by CaPRI in that light, that it will give greater information, and that it will enlighten discussions on education, that it will enable persons who are not specialists in education to join the debate about education in an enlightened fashion, and to develop a public call for greater resources, number one, but of course, greater accountability for the resources that we presently have and greater efficiency in the use of resources that we currently have. I'll always say that the first step in getting more resources is to use what you have more efficiently. And that is the essence of the call for accountability. We started doing some practical things in the ministry for accountability. The first thing we did was to look at literacy. And we set a national target, a national goal of 100% literacy at the grade 4 level by 2015 for all students sitting the grade 4 literacy test. Very ambitious target, but I think targets ought to be ambitious. Otherwise, they're not targets. We then broke that down into school-based targets, which the schools have some say in what the target is based upon they having more knowledge of their resource requirements than the ministry would. We have outlined to board chairmen their responsibility for meeting and maintaining the targets and holding the principals accountable. We have outlined to principals the targets and their role in implementing projects and programs to meet the targets. And most importantly, and this is where the rubber hits the road, we have already said, and we have said it publicly, and I'm going to reiterate here, that failure to meet the targets for literacy will trigger a review. And the review will start from myself reviewing the policy to see what went wrong, because that's what I'm accountable for. I'm accountable for policy and its implementation. If the policy is flawed, then I'm accountable for that.